It's a cold case mystery 137 years in the making. 5 women were slaughtered and mutilated on the dirty Whitechapel streets in London. The rampage began in 1888. The first official victim was Nichols. She was found on August 31st, lying on a footpath on Bucks Row. The body of Annie Chapman was found on September 8th on Hanbury Street. Elizabeth Stride was found near Berner Street. The killer had been interrupted, so she wasn't mutilated, but 45 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes was found in Mitre Square. On November 9th, Mary Jane Kelly was found inside a room at Miller's Court. She had been mutilated beyond human recognition. 11 murders occurred within 10 months, but these 5 are considered the official victims of Jack the Ripper. Police followed hundreds of leads and made 80 arrests, but the case was never solved, and the serial killer would be shrouded in mystery for over a century. But now, with DNA evidence and genetic mapping, we may have a name for the world's most notorious serial killer. Could we finally know the name of Jack the Ripper?
A cold case 137 years old. Now, most people, whether you're a true crime fan or not, whether you're a victim's advocate or you're in this biz in whatever capacity, most people have heard of Jack the Ripper. And so most of the time I don't cover cases like this because it's so oversaturated. There's never any new information. Everybody under the sun has a book and everybody has their own theory. And it's even hard to find a video about the Jack the Ripper case that just gives evidence that isn't slanted towards the video creator's theory. And so you've got so many books, you've got so many documentaries. It seems to me my mission is to raise awareness about cases that need publicity, not just rehash old news. But this case is kind of interesting because after 137 years, we actually have a potential name. Now, when I first heard this, I called BS. I thought, yeah, right. We've had supposed DNA before. We've had supposed this before. We've had supposed that. We've had memoirs show up out of nowhere. We've got eyewitness testimonies that turn out to be crazy, that had nothing to do with anything for 137 years. So when I first seen this, I thought, I'm not going to talk about this because it's probably nonsense. But the more I read into it, the more I have found that there might actually be a legitimate claim to this time. And so I thought, okay, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the science that has come across. We're going to talk about some of the police procedures. We're going to talk about this historical crime because no matter who it turns out to be, there are still 5 to 11 families that need answers, because there was actually 11 women that were murdered in the Whitechapel district of London in 1888 within a 10-month window. Now, there's only 5 of them that they have determined that they believe were all from who we call Jack the Ripper. But there was actually 11 victims that were actually slaughtered in various different ways and horrible means. And there's still family members out there and descendants that would like to know the truth. So we need a name for Jack the Ripper, and I think this one person may have done it. And what makes me really excited is, although there's been a lot of people work on this, there's been a lot of scientists, a lot of researchers, a lot of people with badges. The guy that's come forward and really pushed it through, kind of this end goal, is guess what? An armchair sleuth. He is a researcher, a historian, a crime writer, and I'm like, yes, 1 point for the armchair sleuth. So I was like, yes. So we are talking about Russell Edwards. Now, he has a book out, and if you want to read his book, I highly suggest it. It's in the video description. So check it out. Check that out. It's on Amazon. There's also a documentary that kind of goes into what we're going to talk about. Check that out. There's a link in that as well. So how could this possibly be? How could we get answers 137 years later? Well, first of all, there is a lot more evidence left in this case than people realize. You think for 137 years that there wouldn't be anything left. But there is a lot of things left. There's a lot of reports left. There are a lot of the the original investigators actually wrote memoirs. There was an unwritten rule in law enforcement back then, though, that you could not give the media a name unless you were ready to prosecute. And so there were a lot of investigators, and you'll find when you kind of work your way back through this slush pile of information, you'll work back and you'll find that the original investigators, they, in their minds, they considered this done. They knew who it was. They all had really strong suspicions who it was. They all did not believe that they could actually prosecute, but they all knew this man was off the streets, and they all had a pretty good idea where he was. And so when you find out that the man we're going to present to you today was that man, and you find out that he was on the original suspect list, you'll find out that, this isn't going to be one of those things where the police didn't try. Within that first few years, they had followed hundreds of leads and had actually 80 arrests. They tried to tie this to so many different things. Now, if you're like me, you've heard that Jack the Ripper was everybody from the butcher to the baker to the candlestick maker. You've heard that it was H.H. Holmes, another serial killer. You've probably heard that it was the Freemasons. You have heard that this was everybody. There was even a Jill, the serial killer, and so you will find out that all of that is nonsense, especially when you hear that not only a police constable and another person both seen Jack the Ripper and gave a very almost exact description of their sightings. He was just wearing different clothes. So you realize that there were two people that seen this man right after, they seen him right after they found a body, or right before they found a body. And so it couldn't have been Jill. It couldn't have been Jill. It couldn't have been, some of these people, they were big, tall men, big, brawny men. And everybody said he was about 5'7". He was very diminutive. He had this, everybody described him the same way. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start out by giving you the 5 official victims. And then we will go over the list of suspects. Now, there were a lot of suspects, and like I said, there have been, everybody under the sun has taken a turn being Jack the Ripper as a suspect. And that's just not true. When you find out that there were witness statements, that there were people that seen him, that there were specific things happen, you will find out that the police were probably right. And they have 8 major suspects that you can find the original list. Now, in the 130 some odd years since, you will find out that everybody under the sun has been taking their turn as Jack the Ripper. So we're going to talk about this. Now, I'm going to throw in a few illustrations throughout my presentation tonight. They are all from one specific source. There's a lot of archived photos. Now, you have to realize we're talking 1888. Now, in 1888, the murders actually started in April and lasted till February of 1890, I believe it was. And so here's the thing. Not all of those were actually tied to Jack the Ripper. So they believe that at least 5. Now, I did watch a good documentary that may have argued for a 6th. But so we had a 10-month time frame here that these women were being murdered. And back then, there wasn't a lot of photography. Getting a photographer and getting photos and all that, it's not like today where you can take 10,000 pictures with your smartphone. They all store on your phone, and you might print out 5 in your lifetime. Photos were very valuable back then, so there wasn't a lot of photos. So you see a lot of things like this, where people, in the actual newspapers, they are somebody sketching. So you've got a lot of people sketching, and illustrating the news. So I found this is fairly interesting. So I'll show some of these throughout the presentation. They are all in archives that you can find for free in the public domain. And so this is what we're going to show you tonight. So we're going to be talking about Whitechapel. Now this is a photograph of some of the streets in that time frame. Now, the first one that we know is officially classed as a Jack the Ripper victim was Marianne Nichols. She went by Polly Nichols. Her body was found August 31st, 1888. She was found at 3:45, lying on a footpath on Bucks Row. Now I have a photo of Bucks Row right here. She was lying in a gutter across from the footpath here. So there's Marianne Nichols. This is Bucks Row. Of course, this was, several years after this. It is now has a different street name, but this gives you an idea of what we're talking about. Now, Marianne Nichols was found on August 31st, 1888. Now, she was brutally, she was assaulted. Her throat was slashed, nearly decapitated with it. We're not going to go into the gruesome details because if you've studied Jack the Ripper, you know that he ripped these women apart. He mutilated them, brutally mutilated them. So we're not going to go into the details of that. But Marianne Nichols was the first known Jack the Ripper victim, and she was killed. And this is what really disturbs me. I'm going to try not to go down too many rabbit trails here, but I'm going to list the women, and then we're going to give details of each woman. So Marianne Polly Nichols was August 31st, 1888. Annie Chapman was a short time later. She was found on Hanbury Street. So Hanbury Street here. Now, this was, she was found in this yard, this fenced-in yard behind this, they're not really boarding houses, but that's what we call them nowadays. Okay, so she was found back there. Elizabeth Stride was found on September 30th, and she was not mutilated. She was one of the first and only that wasn't mutilated. She was found on Berner Street here. We will find out that somebody came through with their horse and their wagon and actually disrupted what was going on here. So this person didn't show up in time to save this woman's life, but they did show up in time to save them from mutilation. And 45 minutes later, we will find out that the killer went ballistic, and he went short space away. I can't remember how many yards or how many kilometers or whatever. He didn't go very far away to Mitre Square here on the corner, and this is where he attacked Catherine Eddowes, and she was extremely mutilated. So you can literally see his rage. He didn't get to finish the first time, so he took it out on this poor woman, Catherine Eddowes. And you need to realize all these pictures that I'm showing you, there weren't street lights, there weren't cars with headlights, there weren't flashlights and cell phones with lights. And so this is all extremely dark. And then the last person that we know of that was killed was Mary Jane Kelly. Now, she was the only one to be killed indoors. She was killed here at this place. And it was as if since he was in a building and he felt safe to where no one was going to run in on him, no one was going to interrupt him this time, he absolutely desecrated this poor woman. I will not show you the pictures. They are available online. I will tell you, you need a strong stomach to look at them. But this is an illustrated photograph of the scene at Miller's Court. They said he literally took everything, destroyed everything. You couldn't tell if it was even a human on the bed. She was actually identified by her belongings and the room that she was in. She had checked that room out. So they knew who that was in there. So this is what we're talking about. And then all of a sudden, the women in this area were just terrorized for all this time, all these months. And then all of a sudden, Jack the Ripper disappears. The murders completely stop, and everybody's baffled. nobody can understand what happened. They're like, the Satan himself was loosed on the street in everybody's minds. They were thinking, they were looking for monsters in every shadow, and yet all of a sudden he disappears. And after 137 years, we actually find out why that is. Usually serial killers don't stop killing. They die. They're imprisoned. They have a cooling off period. Sometimes they just get too old to kill that way, so they have to find a new way to kill. You'll find that was what was happening with the Golden State Killer. So we're going to find out that this man actually was in an insane asylum. He actually got put in an insane asylum. So before we get too far, I want to give you guys just a little bit of details about these women. But before we get that far, girls, I want you to jump in and give me your opinion. When you first heard that DNA has come in, it was not just DNA, it was genetic mapping as well. Did you think that this was legitimate, or did you just think this was another harebrained scheme?
Well, I had to read a couple times because, like you said, everybody, over the years, it's this one, it's that one. So that
Yep.
pretty cool.
It's like everybody under the sun thinks they've solved it and wrote a book about it.
Yes.
So, Miss T, what do you think?
I'm kind of the same way. I thought it was something to look into, and I had to be convinced that it was really the truth.
Right. And that was me. I had to be convinced as well, because I've seen so many, and I mean, everybody has been named as, even down to, Miss T and I were talking today. I remember a documentary 15, 18 years ago that they had this big, huge thing and they laid it all out, and it was a great, documentary. Everything sounded legitimate. And then at the end, their big reveal was the serial killer was actually a vigilante groups of Freemasons. And I'm just like, that makes absolutely no sense. Zero sense whatsoever. And I'm like, I think ways that's wrong. And that was back before I even got into true crime. So, you hear insane things. I know, Cricket, you said you heard that it was the Elephant Man. Can you explain to our audience, in case they don't know who the Elephant Man was?
The Elephant Man, he was born with, I don't know what the name of it is, but like his bones would get real big, his distortion, he had a limp. He was in a circus. There's no way. When I saw that, I was laughing.
Yeah.
That you could even put him in as a suspect.
Yeah. Yeah. So to me, this is just, so this is, I believe this is who you're talking about. I will.
John Merrick was his name.
The Elephant Man. Joseph.
Or Joseph, yeah.
Joseph. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick so you guys can see, in case, anybody doesn't actually know who the Elephant Man is. So you can kind of see who we're talking about here. And this gives you an idea, so you have to understand this person is massively deformed because of this condition that he has. And no, this would make him more visible. You can't, this man was a small man. He didn't look any different than anybody else. Nothing drew him out of a crowd. Something about him made the women feel at ease, probably because he wasn't a big man. He was only 5'6", 5'7". He was a smaller person. So for him to get away with this, he couldn't look like this, because that is unique. Not everybody, even with that condition, is going to come out looking the same. So it's like that. It doesn't make any sense. There's no way he could have done that and somebody mistake him
Yeah.
For Jack the Ripper. But this is kind of what we're dealing with. You've got all these people saying all these things. So Marianne Nichols, we need to understand for 137 years. I don't know exactly how many years society felt this way. And even to today, it's still somewhat prevalent in our society. But these women were in the business. They were prostitutes. Okay. So it was like nobody wanted to talk about it. But in Whitechapel during this time, it was a plague because it was so poverty stricken. And if you were a woman and you didn't have a family to take care of you, there was no welfare system. There was no assistance programs. There was no education system. So you couldn't just go back to school and retool and get a new career. And there was nothing. Women could sew. Women could cook. Women could sell themselves. Women could clean. That's about it. And
They didn't
nobody
even have shelters back then.
I'm sorry, what?
They didn't even have shelters back then.
No shelters whatsoever. And you had to have so much money. It's usually, I think they said 4 pence.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much that is. But they had to pay per night to be able to sleep indoors. And some people, there wasn't enough beds. So some people would sleep standing up indoors just so they wouldn't have to be out in the streets. And so I found, I don't care what they were doing. This is the thing. But for a long time, these things were dismissed because somehow these women were less than. And then you start researching their stories, and it really fires me up. Marianne Nichols, Polly Nichols, she was 42 years old. She had 6 kids and a cheating husband. Now, by the time this happens, she had become an alcoholic, and she had become her husband. She ended up, she could stay there while her husband was sleeping with another woman in front of everybody, or she could leave. He kept the kids and she became homeless. So she had no choice. She was either going to stay there humiliated for the rest of her life while her husband slept around with somebody else, or she had to leave. And when she left, she had nothing else. So she literally had to sell herself to be able to have a bed to sleep in. And then when she was the first victim of Jack the Ripper that we think, there was one more that I kind of tend to agree may have been the first one, but this is the first official. This woman was destroyed. She wasn't just killed, she was destroyed. They took her to the makeshift morgue, and they brought in 2 or 3 people to try to identify her. Her son identified her, which was brutal. But then the husband, the ex-husband, they weren't technically, I don't even think they were divorced because it said estranged. He comes in. He stands over her body and says, "I forgive you. This is what this kind of lifestyle will lead to." And he shook his head and walked out. I'm sitting here going, I wish there was a time machine and I would get in it. I would come there. I would stand by her while he said that. And then I would knock his freaking teeth out and say, "You did this. You did not slaughter her. You did not rip her apart. You did not mutilate her, but you put her in this situation to where she was not protected." And so I read that and I was just furious. I'm just like, what do you have to forgive? Now I realize, and I will apologize to any descendant that may be offended by that, but it just shows you the difference in what society was back then and what society is now. Now, I do know after all this, things started getting cleaned up in Whitechapel because that's where all the immigrants went to try to give themselves a better life and give themselves a better chance. And they'd go to work and they'd try to, but the problem is it was such a cesspool. There was so much disease. There was so much poverty. There was so much crime there that most of them never could claw their way out of that cesspool. And so here you have a woman who was supposedly successful. I mean, she had 6 children and a husband. He decided he wanted someone else after 6 children. And so she had nothing else. And this is what she had to do. So we're talking about women who were trying to survive. This was their chosen career field. Then you got Annie Chapman. Kind of in the same situation. I'm not sure. Miss T, you said, did you find that was she widowed or divorced? I can't remember on Annie Chapman, and I didn't write it down.
I saw that she was divorced and then he died after that, her husband.
Was it Annie Chapman, the one that they got divorced because they lost a child and it was just too much for him, but he still gave her?
I did see one children died, and then he did like pay so much a month.
Her with like spousal support after they were separated, I believe. And then that's right. After he died, then she didn't have anything else. And she had chronic illnesses and was extremely malnourished. And she was, again, this was a area where if you didn't have fourpence, it didn't matter that there was a serial killer out there slaughtering women. You have these owners of these establishments that will kick you out and not let you have a bed if you didn't have fourpence. And so I'm sitting here going, it's a whole different society than what we're used to. It really is. And then Elizabeth Stride, she was actually married and had a life going, and seemed like she might actually get out of the poverty a little bit. But she her husband died and she ended up becoming a widow. Catherine Eddowes, I didn't get any background story on her. Have you heard any background story on her?
No.
Catherine Eddowes, most things you hear about her is she's the one that we have evidence. Now, I'll give you a picture. Right here is a sketch of Catherine Eddowes. This is the sketch of what somebody thought the bad guy might look like. But if you look through these photos, you'll see they have made Jack the Ripper look like everybody under the sun. Right here is a police constable that looks suspiciously a lot like Sherlock Holmes. Here's a bad guy. You can't quite see his face. Let me see if you can see. Here, he's got a skeleton he's got a skull for a head. Here, this one I think is interesting. If you look real close, that looks like Dr. Watson. So he's gone from looking like Sherlock Holmes to Dr. Watson. Just like, they don't know what he looked like. And here, see right here, he looks like Dr. Watson right there. So they don't know.
The only thing I saw on her was that she was approximately 46 years old.
Yeah. Catherine Eddowes, what you usually hear about her is the fact that we have evidence. She's the one that left evidence. There was a bloody shawl that was left behind. There was also a piece of her apron was cut and bloody, and they found that piece that had been kind of ripped off or cut. They found it somewhere else, so it kind of gave them an idea of which way the serial killer Jack the Ripper ran. So, but that evidence that she is the one that has the shawl, you will find out that the DNA evidence on her shawl is actually what's going to give us a name. Now, Mary Jane Kelly was the last one. They call it the double night event or something like that.
Yeah.
That was Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes.
Right.
Double event.
Right. So Catherine Eddowes was the last one in the double event. So what happened was Jack the Ripper started his process and he couldn't finish his process, so he killed somebody else, and Catherine Eddowes was that someone else. And so I have a tendency to think that's the reason why he left evidence behind on that one, because he left a lot of evidence around, but that one he was extra sloppy because he was in a rampage. Yeah. Now, the last one that we know of is Mary Jane Kelly. This one is the one that they drew this. This was an illustration they drew for the newspaper, because she was in a boarding house, or in a rooming house, I guess is what they call them. And she was in this rooming house, and the door was locked. And so they thought she must have let him in. So there was something about him that seemed that
Safe.
he could, waylay their fears. They knew that there was a serial killer out there, but somehow, he could waylay their fears. And I think part of it could be the fact that you have this big, tall, skinny, scrawny, scary looking guy with a top hat walking through the London fog. That's what you think about when you talk about Jack the Ripper. But in reality, you're going to find out that the witness statement said he was about 5'7", and you're going to find out that he was anything but that. He didn't wear a top hat. He didn't wear those things. So it's like something about him made the women feel safe. Now, there are 8 official suspects, and each one of these, you'll find that people have a book to guarantee you that it's them. But these are the 8 official that came from the original investigation. One of them is Montague John Druitt. He was a barrister and worked as an assistant schoolmaster. He drowned by suicide later in 1888, and they thought he may have been it. They never. It didn't really make a lot of sense because there was nothing that really tied him to any of those areas. But since he committed suicide it seemed like almost right after that, they thought, well, maybe he was the guy and he committed suicide because this was too much for his conscience. Jacob Sinschmidt, I don't know. I totally screwed that up. He was a Swiss barber, a butcher. So this is the one where you always heard that it was a butcher. This is Jacob. He actually lived on Milford Road, which was not too far from where this happened. He did have some psychiatric disorders. He had severe depression. He also was hospitalized. So when he had his psych eval, some of the doctors kind of told the police about him because they thought he could possibly be one of those. But during the double event, he was still hospitalized. So that kind of wrote him off. Then you've got, I don't know, I can't even tell you what this guy's name is. Sewerwin? I don't know. But he was another immigrant that he had poisoned. He had married and poisoned a wife, married and poisoned a wife, married and poisoned a wife. And so he had, over the course of time, between 1893 and 1894, he had changed his name to Chapman. He had tried to change his whole person. He started going by George Chapman. Okay. But you'll find that he was the poisoner. And so he had killed 3 wives. He ended up being hung for his crimes. But once you start studying psychology of serial killers, you find that if they're a poisoner, they're not the same kind of psychology as someone who is going to stab and mutilate and desecrate a human body. They're more into the power of watching them die and bemoaning them and wailing over them and acting like a loving caretaker when actually they're the one that's killing them. It's a whole different psyche.
And that's when you don't jump from one to the other.
Exactly. Then there's Michael Ostrong. He was a con man and a thief. He had said he was a surgeon in the Russian Navy, even though nobody could verify that. And then he had he had kind of inflated his big and badness, trying to make himself look tougher and all this. And so some people actually thought he could have been, but law enforcement discovered that he wasn't actually, he wasn't that type of a person. He never, they didn't think he'd ever killed anybody. And he was actually in jail for kind of petty things in France during the time of the Ripper murder. So that dropped him off. There was a John, I'm not sure. I always want to say Pfizer, but there's no H in there. So Pfizer, he was a Polish Jew and a bootmaker. And one of the names that Jack the Ripper went by, was Leather Apron, and he always wore a leather apron. And he had a conviction for stabbing someone before, but again, it's somebody that over the course of time they realized he was in jail, or he was out of town, or he was somewhere else. There's James Sadler. James Sadler, he had murdered one person. He had murdered a friend named Frances Coles. And there was two, he had kind of cut her neck and two big slashes or whatever. And so since it was a knife wound to a woman and it was, the throat was slit, they thought, well, maybe it could be him. Come to find out, he wasn't actually in the area. And this was a one-on-one, anger event towards this one person. It wasn't just to women in general. Francis Tumblety was a doctor, and he was somebody that there was quite a few of the original investigators that really thought it was this guy. But again, they would find out that most of these people, they fit so well, but then there was always just one thing that was off. Now, there's one person that fits. His name was Aaron Kosmiski. Now, Kosmiski, he was a Polish Jew that was admitted to the lunatic asylum right after the Whitechapel murders. Now, you'll find out that right after the Whitechapel murders, he also threatened his own sister, with a knife, and they put him in an asylum. You'll also find out that the head of London CID, Dr. Robert Anderson, actually suspected him because he had written some documentation, some letters and things, but also he had written a memoir. And he said that they knew who Jack the Ripper was, but there's an unwritten rule in law enforcement that they don't talk to the media, so he cannot give you the name. But he said that he believed that Jack the Ripper was a Polish Jew who was a madman and put into a mental asylum. He said he knew this for a fact. He said because the man that seen him, one of the two witnesses that seen Jack the Ripper, recognized him immediately and pointed him out of a lineup, but he refused to give any testimony against the man. He said because it was a tradition of the Polish Jews of that community of that day to not testify against one of their own and put them up. I believe the way he said it was Gentile justice. So he believes that it was this man. And when you find out that he was already on their suspect list, you'll find out that this man lines up exactly with the original investigators' thoughts. That kind of makes you think, well, okay, well, maybe he's a better suspect than everybody else. But we're going to take it a step further, and we're going to find out what Russell Edwards actually did to kind of prove this. Now, he says it's proven 100%. I tend to agree, but I would say more. I wouldn't say 100. There's always
never say 100.
I hesitate to say 100. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. I'm going to show you what this guy looks like. Now, This is a computer-generated image based off of some family photos that this family actually provided to Russell Edwards. Let me share this. This is what they believe Jack the Ripper looked like.
And he's not threatening looking.
Now we do believe that he was he was one of 7 siblings. He was the youngest of 7 siblings. He was a Jewish immigrant who fled to the Whitechapel district to flee anti-Semitic problems where he was at. They were being harassed and abused where they were at, so they fled. And he came into the country a few years before this incident as a teenager. And they believe he was either 23 or 26 when he committed these murders. You will find out that they do believe this man had schizophrenia, and he had a schizophrenic break, and he actually threatened his own sister with a knife, and the family ended up putting him in an asylum, and he would eventually die in that asylum. He would not get out. So you think, okay, well, maybe this man fits. Maybe this makes sense. Maybe this is the guy. Well, when you go back to Catherine Eddowes, you will find out that there was a bloody shawl left behind. Well, this bloody shawl was sold on auction, which really ticks me off. The law enforcement should never let that out of their storage. But Jack the Ripper case has become just a big circus, and
How long did they keep it before they sold it? Didn't they keep it quite a few years?
Has been working on it, I believe, since 2019. So I believe he got the shawl after 2019. I'm not sure when he actually bought it. But this man actually bought the shawl at auction and put it up for DNA. He had the money. He paid for them to do a DNA analysis. Now, they found both a male and a female DNA on there. They also went and found, he hired some genealogists to find the descendants of Catherine Eddowes. They found her descendants. Her descendants agreed to give DNA samples. So they gave DNA samples, and they extracted that sample and was able to get a clean male DNA sample from that mixed sample. Then what they did, this man believed that Kaminsky was possibly the serial killer. So they did some genetic mapping to see if they could figure out what kind of DNA this is, because your DNA is a genetic code. So you should be able to figure things out, And they figured out that this person was most likely a Polish Jew. And so they went ahead and did their mapping. They found descendants of the Kaminskys, and they validated it. They got a descendant that agreed to give a DNA sample, and that DNA sample matched 100%. So here we are. We have DNA sample. We have a DNA sample that matches Catherine Eddowes and a DNA sample that matches Aaron Kosminski, all mixed together on this bloody shawl 137 years later. Now, if that's not fantastic enough, you'll find that they double-checked everything with genetic mapping. Now, why wouldn't I say that's 100%? In a court of law, the first thing they're going to argue is the chain of custody of that evidence. And they can't say that somebody else, they're going to argue, well, that shawl has been touched by 1,000 people since it was touched by the killer. And it could have been. But here's the thing. What is the percentage of a chance that Catherine Eddowes' granddaughter or grandson, I think it was a granddaughter, Catherine Eddowes gave her descendants gave their DNA. Then they had what was left was the male DNA. What is the percentage of how could it be cross contaminated with just so happens to be the descendant of Kaminsky? Okay, what is the percent? How likely is that when there's 7 billion people on the planet now? And how many billions of people have lived in the last 137 years? How many of those, what is the percentage of the likelihood that it just so happens to be cross-contaminated with the one person who's the descendant of the suspect? You know what I mean? So to me, it still leans towards that it's true, but it's still, I can see where they would argue it. Now you get on the internet and everybody is going to argue. They're going to say, no, it's not Aaron Kosminski because I wrote a book about this guy, and I have evidence. And they're going to say, no, I made a documentary about this guy. I made a documentary about the Freemasons and it's them, and I'm sitting here going, I'm sure the Freemasons have done a lot of crap. And, we won't get into that because I try not to get into conspiracies too much. But they did not become Jack the Ripper. They didn't become Jack the Ripper. They weren't a vigilante group taking out prostitutes in Whitechapel, London. Jack the Ripper, I believe, according to the evidence that we have now, was Aaron Kosminski because he was an original suspect on the original list. The memoirs and the documents that the original investigators wrote after their retirement all pointed towards a Polish immigrant Jew who had a mental break and spent the rest of their life in an asylum. And this is the one suspect out of that list that fits that. Now, there was one other Polish Jew in that suspect list, but he actually was somewhere else. So we know it's not him. So what do you think, guys? Do you think this is actually Jack the Ripper? Do you actually think he was Aaron Kosminski?
I
What do you
do.
think, Ross?
I do. One thing I found fascinating is Catherine Eddowes had a brooch, and that brooch has been passed down. What is it? Great granddaughter now, and that was really cool.
Yeah. Well, and her great granddaughter actually went and did a press conference on Mitre Square. Is it Mitre Square? Is what it's called, where her great grandmother's body was found. Yeah. And I'm like, that had to be so hard. So hard. I mean, even if you didn't know your great grandmother, just to be there where she was so brutally taken from this world had to be really, I mean, I don't know that I could do it. I didn't know my great grandmother. I don't know her from Adam, but I don't know that I could do that. So, I mean, she is very, very brave and courageous, for doing these things and trying to be active. And she is actively pushing, she's actively pushing to get the courts to do something. So that's kind of where we're at now. What can we do now? Obviously, Aaron Kosminski is dead. He died, I believe they said 28 years after the Jack the Ripper killing stopped. He was put in a insane asylum, not immediately after the last killing, but almost immediately because he threatened his own sister. And then nothing else was heard of Jack the Ripper. And he died, I believe, 28 years later. So we can't take him to court. We can't. And in reality, the courts would have probably put him in an insane asylum since he was schizophrenic. He was, certifiably out of his mind. So I don't know that they would have actually put him to death. They would probably put him in an asylum. So he ended up where he needed to be. But there are still 5 to 11 families who need answers. And so this author Russell Eddowes. He did all this stuff. He paid for it. He got it all together, which I commend him highly for that. I mean, all that stuff takes time and money, and he put it out there. He wrote a book called Naming Jack the Ripper: The Definitive Reveal. I suggest you go look at that and read that, because he goes into his case files. He goes into all the trouble he's had, all of the red tape he's gone through, all the scientific proof he's found. He really lays it out. So you don't have to take my word for it. You can read his words and see all the effort he's put into this. But then on top of all of that, the victims' family members are backing him as well. So they are trying to get a inquest done. They're trying to get the authorities, they're trying to push them to do an inquest to verify this man's findings and to make it official. Because at this point, the only thing that these families get for their so-called justice would be to see the man named in court documents. Grey Wolf says they could possibly have him exhumed to see if there's still DNA from him. He's buried at East Ham, London Borough. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What they have done so far is they found a descendant of his who was willing to give DNA. And I do believe the family of Aaron Kosminski, I believe their names may have changed over time, because they were actually, during his lifetime, he was actually using a different surname. So they are actually, from what I've read and heard, the family is helping. They're just trying to keep their anonymity. Anonymity. There you go. Anonymity. Yes. So they're trying to keep their privacy. And I don't blame them. I mean, that I wouldn't want to be public with that kind of information either, but they are actively helping. And so I thought that was really commendable and brave for them as well. So they are actively helping Russell Eddowes, trying to push the court system into doing their job, because they're like, look, you should have tested that DNA. You should have done the genetic mapping. You should not have sold part of the evidence off. But in all reality, I'm glad somebody went ahead and followed through and did something. So now we just have to sit and watch and see if the authorities will actually follow through and do an inquest. Now there's quite a few people on YouTube that are trying to discount this, but every one of them that I found, they have either written a book that shows somebody else, or they have made a documentary that shows somebody else. So I really, if somebody's discounting this and not even trying to give it the time of day, not even saying, hey, that's interesting, we need to check it out, they're just automatically dismissing it, go look for a book, because I guarantee you they have some kind of investment in it. Because anybody in their right mind should logically say, hey, I realize there could be cross-contamination. I realize there could be this, there could be that. But this is interesting enough. I think the authorities need to look into it, and if they can't do that much, at least, then they probably got a book somewhere.
Yeah.
Let's see. Grey Wolf says, I don't blame them. Patrick Hitler's descendants changed their name. He was Adolf Hitler's nephew, who fought with the U.S. government against the Germans. Yeah. Well, see, there's so many people out there that would hold animosity towards someone that had nothing to do with it. And if there is somebody like this, we've talked about this before, a killer like that, their first victim is their own family. We want to look at all the victims, all these women and their families as victims, and rightfully so. But we need to realize that Jack the Ripper's family, if in fact it is Kaminsky, or whoever it is, if he had family, if he had people close to him, if he had friends, they were victims as well. And so That's unfortunately not everybody. Not everybody thinks that way, and they will mistreat them and ostracize them, and we don't do that here on this channel. So even if I knew who they were, I wouldn't say anything, just because I don't blame them. And this would be something really hard to think about it. This person already knew that their great whatever was a suspect in the Jack the Ripper killings. That's hard enough to handle. And then you have somebody come to you and say, would you give me a DNA sample to prove it? That takes an intense amount of courage to say, yeah, go ahead. Because it would be much easier to say, oh, he was a suspect, but the police were wrong, and just sweep it under the rug and ignore it. It's a lot less to handle emotionally than to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and give you the DNA you need, and then find out, yes, this was, this horrible thing happened, and it was by the hands of my family member, and so I commend the descendants on both sides of this for stepping up and helping this man, Russell Edwards, to try to push this through. Because after 137 years, nobody wanted to test the DNA. Nobody wanted to do anything. Nobody wanted to try anything. They have tried several times to get the courts to do something. And I think everybody just gave up. They're like, it's too old. But here we have some actual scientific evidence. I'm going to keep watching this. And see what happens. I hope we have a name. I really do. I hope that this is it, and now the world will know who this person was, and the families that are left can somehow get some answers. Yes. So, girls, do you have anything you'd like to say before I jump off?
Knowing the truth for these families is so important. Just having that name. I mean, just like the boy in the box who did not have a name for all those years, we found his name, and it puts you at peace.
Right.
You know what happened.
Right. Well, and it takes some of the fear away too.
Yes.
Jack the Ripper goes from being this intense, monstrous boogeyman, terrorizing fear that can't quite be defined, and it brings it down to one very sick human being. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it takes a little bit of that fear away. Of course, Jack the Ripper is 137 years old, but it's the same basic concept for a lot of cases that we've come, and talked to you guys about. It takes away some of that fear, and it takes away some of that dread and that unknowing. And not knowing is worse than knowing the truth. No matter how brutal the truth is, not knowing is worse. And so that's kind of where we are here. But I'm going to keep watching this. I don't know if you guys are going to keep watching it or not, but I'll keep watching, and I'll let you know what I find out. Was Jack the Ripper actually Aaron Kaminsky? At this point, I'm angling towards yes. I am like 85, 90% convinced. So, all right, guys. You guys want to say bye real quick before we jump off?
Have a good night, everyone. See you next week.
See y'all later.
Bye, guys.
Today's episode is brought to you by Bones Coffee Company. You can forget about boring coffee when you drink Bones Coffee. Not only do they offer a variety of flavors such as strawberry cheesecake and maple bacon, they are a family-owned company that puts great detail not only in their coffee, but in the artwork that comes on each individual bag. Bones Coffee has a coffee club that will deliver your favorite coffee to your door every month. If that wasn't enough, they also have some amazing swag to offer. Check out Bones Coffee Company today. I'll have my affiliate links in the show notes for you.